Hello and welcome to our latest episode of Leading at a Local Level with myself. I'm Tim, and with me is my good friend John. How you doing, John?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. Hey, you're sniffing away this morning. You were complaining about your cat?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening, but I'm one of those allergic people who's randomly allergic. So I tend to go okay for a while, and then suddenly, just when I need to record something, my cat makes me explode. So I've taken a tablet and I've been sniffing away. So let's see how we go.
Absolutely. So today, John, we're going to be looking at the subject of conflict.
Yeah.
Healthy conflict, in fact, in teams. So, and someone's written into us about this. And remember, guys, you can share. We've been asking different people to send in their leadership questions. And so this was one of the leadership questions that we had. And so, John, do you want to bring it to us?
Yeah, this is anonymous, and it's from somebody who says this. The big issue I have faced in the last few years is around conflict, both an issue for me personally, but also for us as an eldership. The main issue we've had is that we, or I, have tried to avoid conflict because it's just not nice. But this has then, in the end, made the issue worse and led to greater hurt and conflict in the long run. What do I do about it? So that is our question from someone who's been watching / listening and is anonymous. Tim, why don't you just kick us off, really? What is it about conflict? And this is a very common thing, isn't it, that we hear from leaders saying, I struggle with conflict. Why do we so often struggle with the issue of conflict?
Well, I think that your team, the health of your team, is actually defined by your approach to conflict. And I think so many churches, business teams go to kind of one end of an extreme or another. You either get kind of conflict avoidance on one end, or kind of this very aggressive kind of conflict. I think you used the phrase earlier, conflict Rambos, as we were talking before we started.
Embrace it.
And conflict chickens, and it's kind of a continuum somewhere along the line. But the reality is, isn't it, is that conflict is inevitable. Yeah. You can't have life without conflict. And I guess that's because of two major reasons that I can see. First of all is people. People are annoying. People are difficult. People are unpredictable. People are different to me. And so they might see the world differently. They've got different personalities. And so if I'm going to do anything with people, then the chances are I'm going to end up sooner or later in some form of conflict. Whether that conflict actually happens or whether it kind of remains under the surface, the conflict is still there. There's still tension and pressure and kind of butting up against each other. And so I guess any team that any organization that involves a lot of people, even two people, quite frankly, you'll end up with conflict. And I guess the other major reason that conflict is ultimately inevitable is because anything about leadership is ultimately charting your way through uncharted territory. It's uncertainty. Yeah. Leaders are there to guide organizations, to guide people through uncertainty into something that we don't yet understand, or we don't yet know, or we don't know how that's going to work. And so that's why leaders exist, to help take people through that. And of course, uncertainty is not black and white. There's not necessarily a right answer and a wrong answer to dealing with the problem. There's multiple ways of dealing with that problem. And so as soon as you've got uncertainty and you've got people, you've got conflict. And I think how you handle that and how you approach that is really will be ultimately the kind of the making or the breaking of your leadership in your team. As this chap's put, assuming it's a chap, could be a lady, has put, is really, it defines your team over time in the long run. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but that's
I totally agree. I totally agree, and I know that certainly when conflict has gone badly. In teams I've been on, it has actually defined the atmosphere and the approach for so many. Now, often that has been a team I've recently been on where you've got a conflict Rambo who's come in and actually embraced having some conflict with some other members of the team. No problem, walks away completely unruffled, but leaves in their wake, people who are struggling, people who are just absolutely. And if you talk about the conflict chicken kind of analogy, these conflict chickens are going into their coops and not coming out again, and they're worried about coming out to the next meeting, and they go into their shells, and it just defines the whole atmosphere of a team. So absolutely, I've seen it. And I guess what you're saying, Tim, is that because it can so define, the way our teams work, this is a crucial issue. And that actually, if we can harness conflict in a healthy way, we can actually have stronger teams that work better together, which I think is what you're saying. Now, Tim, you mentioned this conflict continuum, where with these two extremes. Can you tell us a little bit more about what those extremes look like?
Yeah, so let's be honest, John, we're pinching this, aren't we, from a famous business writer who's a Christian, a guy called Patrick Lencioni, who's written a really good book that I'd recommend that you read called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this is where really I first came across this idea. It must have been about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was like a light bulb went on. I was like, oh, that kind of, I knew this all along, but it kind of makes sense. And he explains conflict on a continuum. As I said, you've got on one hand, you've got kind of a zero conflict, sort of almost conflict avoidance situation. And I think a lot of churches fall into this category, and I'll explain why and in a moment. And then on the other hand, you've kind of got this kind of very toxic negative conflict, which I think is a lot of what people have in their mind about conflict, which is where people are sort of having to stand up shouting rows and it's really a negative environment, and people are saying hurtful things that can damage for years to come. But he's kind of saying what you need to find is a kind of sweet spot in the middle, where you're not avoiding conflict, but neither are you allowing it to become toxic or negative. And so really that's our aim, is that and I think you made this point, and I think we'll probably cover it maybe as we go through this discussion, what the benefits of being a team that does conflict well are phenomenal. I think actually we're going to look at that towards the end, why actually getting to this position is important. But it's probably worth exploring, isn't it? What does it actually look like if you're a conflict avoider?
Let's get practical, because I think certainly, I certainly listening to you think, I recognize both of those. And I certainly, be honest, in church, I recognize much more that first one, that actually we like, this prefer not to deal with conflict because that's just not nice. So what are some of the signs that you see of a conflict avoidant team?
I suppose the first thing, looking at it really from a spiritual point of view. So if you're watching this and you're involved in any kind of church leadership at any level, a local level, whether it's a music group or maybe it's being an elder in a church, there's this kind of theology which I think is legitimate, which is really that what we should all be is nice to each other all the time. And of course that totally makes sense, but I wonder whether almost, I don't know if you agree, John, but there's almost this idea that niceness is almost a kind of a label for we can't challenge one another or challenge ideas. And so if you've come up with something that I don't agree with, almost the overwhelming commandment, I guess, is be nice. But I don't think that's what the Bible says. The Bible says is love one another. And sometimes, as a good parent knows, as a good husband knows, actually just saying yes all the time, or a wife for that matter, just saying yes all the time doesn't mean that's the right decision. That's not actually what's good for you. That's not the most loving thing to do. And actually, as this person has written into it, actually in the long term, being nice actually just pushes the issues under the carpet. And I've been part of several teams like that, where the tendency is to push issues under the carpet. So, and all under the sort of the banner or the label of kind of loving one another. And actually it's just because people are afraid to really face it and face the implications of what happens when you challenge that. I don't know, have you seen that, John?
I have, no, I definitely have. And I think that is entirely fair. And I think I fall in more into that category. It's uncomfortable. I'd rather actually keep the friendships going. I think I'd also say that for someone like me, and I know that certainly some people are much more this way inclined, that conflict is incredibly disruptive and quite distressing at some point. So now I've done my Strengths Finder kind of analysis, and in my top 5 strength is harmony. I'm somebody who likes harmony, and when things have been disharmonious, I suppose, if that's the opposite of harmony, and that can be at work and something hasn't quite worked, we've had some firm words as a team or whatever, I feel unsettled. I don't like the feeling that actually things are not nice and smooth and we're not all good buddies and getting on. And I've had to really learn in my leadership, also just in my day-to-day work when I'm not particularly leading, that actually that's an area of my character that I need to work on, because although I bring strength and I can bring harmony, I'm sometimes called a peacemaker. I bring peace, and that they're wonderful gifts, if you like, to have if you're of that disposition. But actually, for people like me who love harmony and who don't like conflict, and who can be conflict chickens, we do also need to learn that actually we can contribute to artificial harmony, and it's not helpful, as you've been saying. That's kind of where I am.
Yeah, and I think if you were to look at how that might play out really practically, I mean, what I've seen is meetings become, like, say you're having a discussion meeting, they become really a kind of almost like a search for peace rather than search for truth. If that makes sense. So rather than trying to find out, like, actually, what's the best way of doing this? And I recognize we might not see eye to eye, but we're going to push through to really get to the right answer. There's a sense of like, well, actually, what the outcome we just need is we just need everyone just to be not offended. And so that's a real example. And because that's what, and the problem is people think that's such a great idea. Everyone kind of no one was offended and everyone was kind of happy, but it doesn't make people happy, because all that happens is that conflict, that issue goes unresolved, and then it comes out. It comes out later on. I mean, I remember, issues maybe that I've dealt with, and maybe there's been an issue about, like, so let's talk about something pastoral, right? So there's been a situation in the church, one of the churches I was in, and there was really the elders kind of had a slightly different view about how to handle a situation, how to handle a person, and what kind of happened is we recognized that it was kind of personal, and maybe the way that person's been dealing with it, I might have dealt with it that way, I might have dealt with it differently. And so we kind of just all nodded our head and said, yeah. But of course, what happened is then the issue reflares up 2 or 3 months later. And actually, a few of us that felt differently, we're like, well, if we'd handled this right in the first place 3 months ago, we would not be in this situation now. And it's got bigger. And actually, the resentment was much greater 3 months down the line than if we'd actually had the conversation properly 3 months ago. We wouldn't have got to the point where then we feel angry that the other person clearly hasn't done what we were wanting them to do. And and so that's just a small example. And obviously we resolved that together and we talked it through as elders. But it was just a small example, just seeing how something like that can just blow up, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And is it you two who maybe you've nicked it from some of the term the nod? Yes. Is that what you've used? Yeah,
that's mine. That's a Tim special. That.
Oh, Tim, this is amazing. So my recollection when you were telling me about this is the nod is that time when you say, "Is everyone okay with that decision?" And you look around and you get the nod, right? So you get people just nodding because, well, maybe it is a genuine buy-in. And there are some people who do teams training and so on who say never accept the nod. You've got to go around and get a verbal buy-in. Now you can still kind of have artificial harmony with verbal buy-ins, but it's probably a little bit more difficult. But the nod, I've remembered that.
I actually would encourage you to push for the no, right? Yeah. This is another thing that I've been thinking a lot about. Yes is a really nice word. Everyone wants to hear the word yes. Do you agree with me? Yes, of course, everyone wants to hear that word, but it's very easy to say yes, and often to say yes and not really commit to the yes. So if I ask you a question, do you like drinking a glass of ice cold water on a hot day?
Yes.
Right? The answer is yes. Of course, the answer is
absolutely.
Yes. If the follow-up question is, let me sell you a water cooler machine, to satisfy that need, you're then in a position where you're like, oh, I now feel like you've almost tricked me into a yes. And almost you need to empower people to say no to your crazy church leadership ideas. So one of the things I do now is I will, when I've come up with an idea, I will say to my team, I want you to think of as many ways that this is going to fail.
Yeah.
There's many reasons as you think this is a stupid idea. I want you to tell me why this is going to not work, right? And because I'm pushing for the no, because if people have got the freedom to voice their objections, their worries, their conflict, their safe way, then actually we get it all out into the open. We talk about it. We can address those concerns. Whereas if I just say, this is a really great idea, isn't it? And everyone kind of nods and goes, Yeah, it is a great idea. And
Absolutely.
they don't want to upset me. What happens is 3 months down the line, when it goes wrong, they were like, well, I didn't really kind of support that in the first place. So now I'm definitely not committed to it. Whereas actually, if you'd had a proper conflict about it at the first place, actually there would have been a much greater sense of buy-in at the beginning.
And that comes down to our willingness as leaders to come into a meeting, well, a well prepared, which sometimes in a rush we might not be, but B, actually, that we're not just there to get the nod and to get everyone to agree to our ideas. Absolutely. We're there to genuinely seek our team's buy-in and challenge, and we maybe have to go back to the drawing board, and that's painful as a leader when you just want to get on with it. That's really working together. And I find what happens is that with conflict avoidance situations, I know that there's people who have got an opinion about it, and they may have told me one-to-one. It's a bit, we've covered this before with feedback. You're always going to get feedback. You're always going to get people who will say, I don't like that idea, but are they willing to share it in a group? And it can be very frustrating when you look at someone thinking, go on, you come in now, you share why you're not happy about that idea, and they won't, because of being conflict avoidant, whereas in private they've told you exactly how they feel.
And that is a brilliant sign that you've got a conflict avoidance problem in your team. So if people are moaning about it privately, and the Bible talks about it, isn't it? If you've got a problem with your brother, take it to your brother. If he doesn't listen, take someone else with you and challenge them. If they still don't listen, then bring the church in. And I think there's this attitude of like, if you've got a problem with someone, you need to have it out. You can't just hide it away and hope that it's going to go away. You need to actually have it out in a meaningful way. So if I were to say to you, how do you know if you've got a conflict avoidance culture? First of all, your meetings are all about people saying yes and about peace rather than about actually coming to the right decision.
Yeah, that's good.
I think you've got... When people are saying things in private that they won't say in public, that's a problem. If you've got that, I think if you've got kind of a sense of people just having to say yes to things, even though they don't really agree with it, I think you've got a problem. And I think you need to address that if you've got, because in the end, all it does is you're just sweeping it under the carpet, and sooner or later, it's just it will go wrong sooner or later.
And that's the challenge of leadership, isn't it? And I think particularly, I think a challenge for us as leaders is to be looking at our teams and to be helping those who are perhaps by personality more conflict avoidant. And I think I want to be really clear here. This is not a criticism. We're going to come on to conflict Rambos in a moment. Okay, so don't worry. But it's not a criticism of you if you're one of those more gentle, conflict avoidant people. We want to challenge you on that, but actually also recognize that a lot of personality, there's a lot of strengths that you bring to a team, and our job as leaders is to bring out those strengths and to encourage people, particularly who perhaps are personally conflict avoidant, and have those discussions where we all recognize perhaps where we're at, and recognizing the difference of culture as well. So sometimes people come from family cultures where conflict is normal. Certainly, coming into my marriage, one of us has come from a family where it's all out in the open, and it's the opposite for the other. So family cultures, sometimes even ethnic cultures. There's certainly been challenges that a team I've been on where for a person from one background where it's quite common actually just to have everything out in the open, really struggled with a more probably classically British, let's not really say what we mean and let's just keep the peace. And that caused real issues actually with us gelling as a team. And I wish we'd had these conversations around conflict and what we bring to the team before it actually went wrong. So,
absolutely.
So I mean that's how maybe we should move on to signs of toxic conflict. We thought about signs of avoiding and conflict avoidance, but Tim, what are some of the signs of when it goes toxic, when it goes wrong?
So I think the first thing I'd say is that when people feel the need to defend their corner, so if you feel like you're trying to defend your corner, like you've got a point of view to bring that you've really got to defend, or you've really got to get your point across, then that's a dangerous place to be. Surely as a team, we're all looking at an issue together and trying to come to the right decision rather than fighting. And I've seen it in elderships. There's almost like elders feel that they've got like a group of people that they're protecting, and that they're protecting them from the other elders almost.
Seeing that.
What are you doing? Like, surely we all love the church together. Like, surely actually, and that's really dangerous when then you've got to sit down and work that through. So I'd say people fight in their corner. I think the second thing is when you hear people use like this is one of the big things. Funny, one of my aunts told me this in my early years of marriage. She said, beware of using like the words never or always.
Yeah.
And I thought, what do you mean by that? And she sort of explained it to me. And so, it's like in conflict, you never do this, you never remember to, pick up your socks off the floor. And it's like, well, it's quite a definitive statement, or you always, you always do this. It's very kind of condemning, isn't it, as a statement? And so you've got to be really careful. I think if people using that kind of language, you're thinking, that's quite toxic if you do that. And I think kind of the other thing I'd say is if people are feeling like they're competing against one another, particularly in church, they're competing for kind of, for platform time. Sounds stupid, doesn't it? But, like, I want to preach a bit more, or I want to be doing this. Surely, again, I suppose it all comes down to the mission. If people are prioritizing themselves over the mission or over the team, then you've got an unhealthy conflict environment. I think that's kind of, and I've seen some really bad ones. But I've been more in work than church. I always remember this situation that I was in my early years of teaching, and there was some big disagreements between like, it was almost like there was one guy and then a group of other people in the team, and it got to one point where literally, like, it was a team meeting, and he stormed out of the team meeting, this fella, and because obviously it got so tense, they were really shouting at each other and really being very aggressive, and it got to the point where the lady that was upset with this man who walked out, was open the window, the second floor window, as he was walking away, kind of across the kind of the concourse, and was shouting at him across the concourse. It's like, this is not. I was only like 21, 22 at the time. I was like, this is not healthy. This is team. There's a healthy team to be a part of. Like, this is not how to manage conflict. So, obviously, hopefully you haven't been in elders meetings like that. Although I have been in one or two elders meetings, they've been a little bit like that.
And again, sometimes that toxic conflict can come out very in a very open way, but it can also come out in more in undertones and little comments that are made that we know can upset people and slap people down in an unhelpful way, and that can also show you just know things are not right in that team, and it's always really sad to see. And as I say, it's very damaging. I think it's very damaging to people, and I've certainly had to deal with a relational issue with some people on my team where it's taken time to resolve what happened in the meeting. And I think it was very helpful to go very relational. I think at the end of the day, much of the toxic conflict is happening when our teams aren't healthy. So when we're not trusting one another, when we're not believing the best in one another, that when somebody who is perhaps more likely to come out with something quite firm that you might find quite aggressive, or you might find difficult to respond to, that might just be their personality, or they're particularly passionate about this issue. And sometimes it's good just to say, let's believe the best in each other here. Let's believe that we're all on the same team, that we're all pulling in the same direction, that we're not seeking to undermine each other. And that comes through trust, it comes through relationship, it comes through knowing one another well, it comes through doing leadership in community rather than just turning up and seeing people at meetings. And certainly the people I struggled most with on a particular team I was on were the people I didn't know that well. And actually when they did say stuff that I found, no, I don't agree with this, I wasn't always sure of their motive. And that's a really unhealthy place to be in a church, for goodness sake. So really, really working on that relationship has been helpful for me. Is there anything else that you found helpful just in terms of dealing with that toxic conflict, Tim?
Something that someone once said to me, which was quite helpful, was assume positive intent.
Yeah.
Which sounds really silly, but what it means by that is that assume that someone's doing it for the right reason.
Yeah.
So, and I think particularly in the church, you should have this mindset that people want to do the right thing. They want to love and they want to care. Their intent is not nefarious, by which I mean, they're trying to, I don't know many people in church that are really trying to, in fact, I don't know anyone in church really that's trying to kind of, get their little corner and establish themselves and, working for their own glory. I don't know anyone like that in church, but I think sometimes the devil can make us think that, that there's kind of negative, what's the word, malicious kind of intent. But actually we should assume positive intent. We should assume they're trying to do the right thing. We should assume that. I don't know if do you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think thinking the best of people Yeah, is key. I mean, I wonder if I can mention just two things I've found really helpful as somebody who's sort of leading meetings or going into a meeting where I know that the conflict might come out. And one of them is I said, is be better prepared than anyone else around that table or on that Zoom call. Okay, so being prepared, thinking through what could the possible objections be to my idea, or someone else is bringing an idea. How might so and so respond? How can I preempt that? How can I make sure I've got the data? And you name it, be prepared, be better prepared if you can than others around the table. Not as a competition, but be well prepared as the leader if you're leading that discussion. And secondly, preempt conflict. So I know that there are certain people that I work with who they don't like being ambushed. They don't want to hear it at the same time as everybody else. They may react. Okay, that may be a personality issue that needs to be dealt with, but I will seek to know them well and to head that off by having some pre-meetings. And sometimes that does really help just to reduce conflict where you say, look, I'm going to introduce this. I know you're going to have some stuff to say. Let's have a chat about it now rather than it coming up. And we all know the church meeting where that's happened. Okay, it's all on Zoom now, but with some, that there's a couple of people who are going to stand up and say something. Okay, and it's going to be uneasy. And although that might be healthy to have that conversation in the open, it's probably helpful to have a conversation in advance with that person if you can. I don't know if you agree with that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's my whole leadership mantra. Really, is that we want to get to the meeting if we can. Particularly if it's an issue and everyone knows what's going to happen, and then you can have a conversation where no one's been ambushed, and you can have a meaningful conversation. Have you seen the Jackie Weaver thing? Did you see that? Have you not? Oh, John, can I say, anyone that's watching, listen to this, Google Jackie Weaver council meeting. Oh, it's a Zoom meeting that happens on it's not a Christian thing. And if you want to see an example of really toxic conflict, like that's an extreme version. Like she's the leader of the council, and she's this parish council.
I saw her do something with Gary Lineker or something like that. Was that? I saw a clip like that.
Yeah. Check it out. It's quite. It's a big issue. Just one other thing I'd add actually.
Yeah.
Is the beware of your passive aggressive tendencies.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not a particularly passive aggressive kind of guy. It's just not. If I've got a problem with you, I'm probably going to say it pretty quickly to your face. Yeah. It's not really my style, but I know I've got several people in my church who I think would naturally default to the passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, kind of, and it actually, that's worse. Like, if you've got a problem, don't be passive aggressive. Come and say it. Don't be a chicken. If you're sitting there being angry, then don't do it. It's not godly. It's not righteous to be there and be passive aggressive. Either say nothing until you can say something positive, or actually say, look, I'm really sorry, I've got a problem with that, or that's hurt me. But but don't sit there and go fine or sure or okay. It's like, that's just it's weak, really, and it's not what God wants for churches and teams.
Yeah. And it's a reminder, of course, that conflict in relationships is very real. And I think at a leadership level, we need to be considering addressing that, in all of our relationships, not just as in the leadership stuff in the church, but people bring in their personality, but they also bring in their habits, their patterns that they've formed in their families, perhaps in their marriage, perhaps with their children. That can include being passive aggressive, these things are all brought in from home, if you like. And so actually we have a responsibility to be teaching and working with people relationally, I think, in church, because I think conflict in relationships is right up there, isn't it, Tim? It's right near the top of pretty much for any relationship. And if we can teach well on that, teach biblically on that, then we're in a good place. Now, look, I'm aware we're going to need to wrap up, but Tim, before we do that, just give us a quick feel. What would it feel like to be in a team, a situation where there is healthy conflict?
Yeah. So let me tell you about my church.
This could be dangerous.
I think actually, in a team which is, it's what a great question that is, John. What does it look like to be, Well, I think first of all, you've got people that feel free to express what they actually think and feel. Yeah. That's the most, and actually that reduces stress and anxiety, because I actually can be honest about how I'm feeling, and I'm not going to be smacked down because of it. And actually, the concerns that I have are all inputted into the mix, where we actually come out with the right decision at the end, or the right approach. And actually, that's the kind of team that I want to be a part of, where we have, our meetings are lively. they're challenging, but they're fun. They're engaging. You know, where if we've got a problem with each other, we sit down, we work it through. Because actually, when I do that, my relationship with you know, the other people is way stronger, because I know that we're on the same page. I know that, like, we're actually together on this. And even when we're not together, I know that they've said everything they wanted to say. They're not kind of, you know, because this is the big problem, isn't it? Is that people think to themselves, I think they're not happy with this. But they haven't said they're not happy. But I'm 90%, 99% certain they're unhappy. So I'm then moving forward in a kind of uncertain way, because I'm a bit worried that, like, you know, that they're not happy. So I think, to me, you know, that's what it looks like. It looks like a team that's fun, a team that actually, you know, says what they think, where people are safe to do that, you know, and actually relationships are stronger. And ultimately, the church, the team, the organisation is stronger because of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, it's been a great discussion, Tim, without much conflict, which is good for someone like me. But I think just an encouragement to me today has been to actually ask that question: do I have healthy conflict in my team? I think that's a good question for us to ask as we go away, just to think about it. And I hope that's what this conversation has just helped us think about. You know, what does conflict look like where I am? And just to ask that question: does everyone have that freedom to speak? And obviously we could have a lot more conversation, but we've run out of time today. Tim, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. It's been great to catch up again. This is leading at a local level. It'd be great if you have your questions, issues, you know, like we've just dealt with today. Please do get in touch with us. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's a video or a message or an email. You can do that. There's some show notes that we're producing for this episode and for all the other episodes we're doing. You can subscribe at the MLG YouTube channel. Do share this with those who might feel interested. But Tim, thanks for the chat today, and I will see you soon.
Yeah, fantastic, John. See you later.
Cheers. See you. Bye.